Brendon Walsh. I go by Neamu online. I work at a company called Mobot. This is one of our bots that is doing mobile experience testing. So it's sort of automating and doing programmed inputs on this phone screen as it sends messages. So if your team is struggling with any emulation or physical device testing, get in touch. So progressive enhancement, this is the original source of the people who coined the term back in 2003 at a South by Southwest presentation by Stephen Champion and Nick Fink. And in this presentation, they cover some of the problems that web developers are facing at the time. They're talking about there's greater functionality demands, there's more complexity in the browser, it's more difficult to support all these new devices. I'm sure a lot of this is still sounding familiar and relevant today to all of you. Each new device has new limitations, new constraints. So each of these issues are still with us today, especially when we talk about mobile design and display screen resolutions. But certainly as we get more and more places hooked up to the internet, bandwidth constraints are still with us today. So they outline these strategies that they refer to as progressive enhancement. So they start with the lowest common denominator. And in this case, I'm going to interpret that as HTML, right? Every web browser at least understands HTML. So let's start with that. Let's build semantic HTML elements on top of that. And once we have our basic semantic HTML structure that we've paid attention to accessibility with, then we can layer on style sheets on top of that. We have structured presentation to that markup. And finally, at the very end, then we can layer on our JavaScript at the very end. So it's this layered accretion approach to web development, right, where we start with small elements that are simple, and we layer on things iteratively. This is a joke by Mitch Hedberg that covers a lot of the same sort of idea, and I won't ruin the joke by reciting it to you. But the bit here is that he's talking about escalators as an enhancement on a fixed staircase, where a staircase on its own works just fine. It requires you to put in the effort to climb the staircase, but an escalator is an enhancement on that idea. What if we have revolving stairs that get you to where you're going faster and with less effort? And so ultimately, the idea of progressive enhancement and this joke by Mitch Hedberg are very closely related. You'll see it in a lot of blog articles on the subject. So I want to talk about 3 benefits to progressive enhancement. We're going to talk about performance, resilience, and accessibility in that order. So we'll start with performance, so getting there fast. This is a slide about the LCP load time. So LCP is the largest contentful paint. This is from a presentation at Google I/O this year. And you'll see here in the blue, that's the HTML markup. The purple is the style sheets. The green are media resources. And finally, the yellow area is the JavaScript. And you'll note here, importantly, that the JavaScript is blocking. The page doesn't get any actual content rendered to the display until the JavaScript has finished loading and finished executing. So this is what we would refer to as single page app development online, where you've built a React app, for example, and all of your rendering is blocked on that JavaScript. It needs to execute, otherwise you get your empty HTML app shell. And in this presentation, they talk about how, well, if you want to improve your LCP score, if you want to get to the main area of your content loading faster, start server-side rendering, start building HTML and serve as much of your content as you can in HTML first. That way you don't block on all of this JavaScript. All of the yellow area of this graph ceases to be relevant, at least as far as the LCP is referred to or concerned. So the HTML serves the content faster. You're generally more performant. So next up, resilience. This is a term where I have stolen directly from Jeremy Keith. Jeremy Keith has delivered many talks, all fantastic. He's also written a book called Resilient Web Design, which I highly recommend if you haven't checked it out. It's free online. You can go find it at resilientwebdesign.com. And in that book, and he outlines these 3 steps to what he considers to be fundamental to progressive enhancement. Identify the core functionality of your website, then use the simplest possible technology to implement that, then layer on enhancements. Very much similar idea, just condensed from that original 2003 talk at South by Southwest almost 20 years ago. This, I'm sure many of you recognize. This is Rich Hickey's speculation talk in 2016, and he's outlining these terms for growing your software in terms of versioning and how do you iterate on your software. And he's ultimately outlining you should be building software that only accretes new features, right? You never suddenly axe features. And he outlines, we should be providing more or requiring less or both. And I think progressive enhancement is really about requiring less. It's really about lowering that bar. We have a very high bar right now in web development. We're expecting all of our web browsers to have the latest JavaScript features. At the very least, we expect them to have a JavaScript engine in a lot of cases to render any of our content. So progressive enhancement is really about relaxation. It's requiring less of our browsers so that they only need to interpret the HTML if they really want to get to the core content. And then when they've provided to us that they have a JavaScript engine, we can provide them with more content and we can enhance the experience from there. I don't have time to go into any of these articles, but each one of these are great, and there'll be a link to all of these at the end of my slides. But each one of these articles is dispelling the myth that JavaScript is ubiquitous and available everywhere. It fails for a number of reasons, and a lot of them are not what you would immediately expect. So give that a consideration when you're building. The last thing, accessibility. So there are things that you can do when you're building a single page app, when you're building with JavaScript from the beginning that can ultimately get you into trouble when accessibility is concerned, that if you were doing server-side rendering would never happen. So this is a span element with an on-click behavior, and it's doing a page transition. So the page transition here is ultimately should just be changing the page, and we wanted to do this for fancy reasons, right? To add some animation or load content iteratively without requiring a full page refresh, which is all well and good. But the problem with this is the browser doesn't know that this is a link. You can't hover over it to get what the link is going to be taking you to. You can't copy that link and paste it into another web browser or share it with a friend. You can't open it in a new tab. You can't keyboard navigable it. There's nothing discoverable about the fact that this is a link on this page. If instead you had started here and started with just a simple anchor tag with an href attribute, you would have that accessible behavior built in. The HTML in all browsers understands this, and this semantic element ultimately covers a lot of the needs. And so using CLJC, we can write in this enhancement. We get the best of both worlds here. We get the anchor tag, which has the built-in href functionality. This will work for both server side and client side. But when we do an on-click, we can prevent the default action and do our fancy transitions afterwards. And I'm double dipping in Rich Hickey's speculation talk, but this slide is too good not to at least bring up. But this is, notably, I'm not here to pitch a new library or a new framework. This is really about just discipline and leveraging the power that we have in Clojure to do a much better job at delivering much more progressive web applications that are performant, they're resilient to when things go wrong, and they're ultimately more accessible. Thanks very much.